Well, good morning. Rise and shine to the morning momentum, your daily dose of a comprehensive rundown of the top stories making the headlines. Today being Wednesday, the 9th of October 2024, just a day or merely hours after the 13th Parliament made history in the country. For the first time, a deputy president has been impeached under the 2010 Constitution on 11 grounds. So that is one of the top stories that makes the headlines here on the papers. So let's get up close and candid with the Standard. On the front page, impeached. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua was last night overwhelmingly impeached by the National Assembly in a historic motion despite his spirited defense and that of his closest allies on the floor of the House, and it is now up to the Senate to save or send him home. That story is beefed up for you on page 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the Standard this morning. Inside, Gachagua makes spirited defense in the House. MPs accuses the Deputy President of money laundering and graft. Public participation reveals disparities, and drama as political daggers drawn. Now, full list of how MPs voted in motion is also beefed up for you on the Standard this morning. Now, on other stories, judges left out by Uhuru awarded 126 million shillings. Major win for 6 appeal court judges: Weldon Korir, Agri Muchelule, George Odunga, Joel Ngugi, Evans Makori, and Judy Omange, after they were each awarded 20 million shillings. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. On page 20 this morning on the Standard, airlines join bid to block Adani deal. Now, the Kenya Association of Air Operators, a lobby group representing local carriers, opposes the handing over of Kenya's prime airport JKIA to Adani, saying any such engagement with a private operator should be done through competitive bidding. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 20. Now, on page 9, TSC recruitment deadline extended. On page 16, Kenya alert over Marburg virus. That story is beefed up for you also on the Standard this morning. Let's get into the elephant in the room. Now, on page 2 of the Standard this morning, MP accuses Gachagua and his sons of money laundering and graft. Mover of impeachment motion says the DP acquired wealth illegally and undermined the president, who is William Ruto. Legislator questions how young Gachagua's sons managed to get 600 million shillings bank loan. That story is beefed up for you on page 2. Now, First Wealth, 5.2 billion shillings is DP Gachagua's wealth that MP Mutuse claims the deputy president cannot account for. That story is beefed up for you on page 22. Now, also Voice of Reason, impeachment not a priority, religious leaders tell MPs. Religious leaders have urged legislators to drop the impeachment motion against the deputy president Gachagua. The National Council of Churches of Kenya, NCCK, the Catholic Church and Muslims yesterday expressed concern that the debate was diverting the attention from issues, quote unquote, killing the nation. More of that is beefed up for you on page 2. On page 3, still the impeachment motion reactions, results of public participation shows disparities and low turnout in Kenya. What is turned out in Keio South voted in support of the impeachment. Some of the constituencies in central Kenya recorded as low as 20 participants. But the big question remains, why was the public participation done? Because yesterday in the parliament we never saw anywhere where the statistics from public participation were used on the grounds of impeaching the deputy president. So was it a waste of time and resources? We will get to know as time goes by. On page 4 of the Standard this morning, political daggers drawn as House debates besieged deputy president. Kibwezi West MP Mwengi Mutuse makes his case against the deputy president, and MPs debate conduct of DP Rigathi Gachagua in a definitive motion that led to his impeachment. More of that story is beefed up for you and on page 4. Remember all this from page 2 to page 4 We have the sentiments of different MPs featured also. You can read them when you grab your own copy of the Standard. On page 5, Rigathi, I learned from the best, my boss. Deputy President denies accusations against him, trashes Parliament. Says he did as President Ruto did in his criticism of state officials. Of course, yesterday there's a video that was played in Parliament of the then Deputy President William Ruto criticizing the police boss, and then Rigathi Gachagua said he had learned from his boss based on that clip. Let's move on and take a look at page 6. Deputy President's responses to each accusation he was facing. Charges that Deputy President was involved in the 3.7 billion mosquito net tender from KEMSA through a proxy firm. This was the response. I had no involvement in the KEMSA 3.7 billion shillings tender. The claim is false, and the tendering process was conducted independently. Also, you have that featured for you on page 6, all the 11 grounds and the responses the DP gave in Parliament yesterday. Still on page 6, Gachagua put case forward but failed to convince majority MPs. 281 members of Parliament voted to impeach the Deputy President on 11 grounds. Efforts from largely Mount Kenya MPs defend the DP failed, as only 44 MPs voted to save him. More of that story is beefed up for you on page 6. Now, how the MPs voted is also beefed up for you on page 7. The MPs that voted yes versus the MPs that voted no. All that is beefed up for you on page 7. You might want to know how your legislator voted. You'll catch up with that on page 7. Now, away from Gachagua impeachment on page 8, activist KANU man arrested over claims of impeachment slur. KANU's communications officer was picked while walking back home yesterday. He was inciting people. Now, Morara was also detained on allegations of causing chaos in Bomas of Kenya during the impeachment drive. That story is beefed up for you on page 8. On page 9, race against time as TSC extends recruitment deadline by 24 hours. Many teachers struggled with technical issues on the recruitment portal, and the extension was to compensate for time wasted following system failure. That story is beefed up for you on page 9. On page 10, Senate to hear Kericho governor impeachment through plenary. Governor Eric Mutai is accused of gross violation of the Constitution. He is also facing accusations of sexual indecency. That story is beefed up for you on page 10. Let's move on and take a look at the expert opinion on the Standard this morning. Extending term limits would hurt our democratic foundation. Now, Kenya is now tightly gripped with discussions about potential modifications to presidential term limits. The discourse touches the very core of our democratic edifice. The Constitution explicitly limits the presidential tenure. This necessary provision did not emerge from a vacuum. It egressed from hard-learned lessons of our political and historical bad manners. That story and the expert opinion on that is beefed up for you on page 12. Now, on Palava, on page 13 this morning, the fall of a dry leaf, says Collins Lumumba, is a warning to a green one, and a torn underwear is removed together with the trouser. These great words, he adds, depicts the real situation in Kenya right now. Quote and quote, I wish to remind the president that even Jesus did not impeach Judas despite the fact that he knew Judas was going to betray him. No man can separate what God has put together. More of that is beefed up for you on the expert opinion on page 13 of the Standard this morning. Let's move on and take a look at page 16. Kenya on high alert as Marburg virus cases increase in Rwanda. Health authorities heighten checks over viral outbreaks. 2 cases confirmed in Rwanda, hence cross-border concerns. That story is beefed up for you on page 16. Now, on the Standard Enterprise this morning, it's all about redefining the path to home ownership via technology. You want to catch up with more of those insights on the article. Let's take a look at county news on page 17. Governor Mwangaza fights for delay of ouster, hits out at Kingi. Meru governor pleads for extension of court order allowing her to remain in office as case proceeds. Senate Speaker pokes holes into her High Court suit seeking to overturn her impeachment. You want to catch up with more of that on page 17. Now, briefly, in Tana River County, state asked to stop inciters. Leaders have called for the arrest of those inciting communities to violence after 12 people were killed in Bangale. Speaking in Order Village, Cabinet Affairs Principal Secretary Idris Dokota and former Governor Hussein Dado described the animosity as unfortunate. That story is beefed up for you on page 17. Let's move on and take a look at more county news on page 18. Commotion as Speaker is ejected from his seat. Chaos erupted in Nyamira County Assembly yesterday after members forcefully ejected Speaker Enoch Okero from his seat over allegations of impropriety. That story is beefed up for you on page 18. Also, youth call for climate action ahead of COP29. The Climate Justice Camp is being held in Arusha, the first time in sub-Saharan Africa. The camp seeks to come out with a collective voice that will be presented at COP29. That story is beefed up for you on page 18. Now, let's move on and take a look at business news on the Standard this morning. Local airlines join bid to block state's JKA Adani lease proposal. Now, they say the process should have been subjected to competitive bidding. Other stakeholders in the aviation industry have also opposed the plan. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. In the credit market, leaders freeze loans as CBK cuts benchmark rate. Despite the Central Bank of Kenya cutting its key lending rate, banks are tightening their lending standards, deepening concerns about the availability of credit to businesses and households. The tightening of lending standards by banks is likely to have a negative impact on the economy as businesses and households will find it more difficult to access credit. That story is beefed up for you on page 20. Now, let's move on and take a look at sports news on the Standard this morning. Let's see what we have here. Red Bull to fly without Ricciardo wings. Daniel Ricciardo competed in last weekend's Singapore Grand Prix. 8-time F1 racer winner leaves RB replaced by Liam Lawson. Now, let's take a look at the next page, which is 30. Man City legal case explained as English Premier League and League champions claim victory. This case is not directly related to the Premier League Disciplinary Commission, which will hear 115 charges against Manchester City. The rivals are the biggest losers in the case on the issue of commercial deals involving clubs' owners. That story is beefed up for you on page 30. On page 31, Alila pledges to restore nation's glory as he launches his bid. A former Football Kenya Federation National Executive Committee member has pledged to restore the nation's glory in the most popular sport. Tom Alila yesterday officially launched his bid for FKF presidency with a call for leadership ready to grow the beautiful game country-wide. That story on page 31. On the cover page of the Standard this morning, why Musa Otieno is unhappy with Stars playing on foreign soil. The former Harambee Stars captain takes a dig at the government for failing to renovate stadiums on time. Kenya will host Cameroon in a crucial 2025 AFCON qualifiers match in Kampala. Now, also out goes Barry Otieno, in comes career as FKF CEO. Football Kenya Federation CEO Barry Otieno has thrown in the towel ahead of the delayed national elections slated for 7th of December. The beleaguered federation immediately appointed Nairobi City Stars boss Patrick Korir to serve in acting capacity as Otieno's replacement barely an hour after he announced his resignation yesterday. So with that story of FKF, we take a quick break here on the Morning Momentum, and then we come back with the top stories making the headlines on the Daily Nation. Don't go away. See you on the other side of this broadcast.
Je, wewe ni mfanyabiashara katika sekta ya elimu? afya bora, usafiri ama unamiliki kampuni yoyote ile? Ungependa kupata fursa ya kutangaza biashara yako ili kuwafikia wateja zaidi? Usikonde. Runinga ya Younib inakupa fursa ya kupeperusha matangazo kuhusu bidhaa na huduma unazotoa kwa bei nafuu. Kwa maelezo zaidi, wasiliana nasi kupitia nambari za simu 0750344700 ama kupitia barua pepe marketing@younibtv.com. Jinyakulie leo. Younib TV, ever the best.